Everyone dreams about living an uncommon life, but how we define that dream is very different for each of us. And for most, it's a lifelong pursuit. Welcome to the Uncommon Life Project podcast. We're going to introduce you to people who are living that life or enjoying the journey to get there. We're going to also give you some tools, tricks, and tips for starting or accelerating your own efforts to live an uncommon life, a life worth celebrating and savoring. Please welcome your hosts, Brian Dewhurst and Philip Ramsey.
Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of your favorite show, Brian's favorite show, the Uncommon Life Project, where I'm your host, Philip Ramsey.
And I'm Brian Dewhurst.
Thanks for tuning in. We're grateful that you're listening. Thanks for taking the time. Man, we have the greatest listeners and we have an amazing guest, and I can't wait to get him on the show so he can go to sleep because he's not in our time zone. Can't wait. Give us our bio. Let's rock.
All right, we've got the one and only Graham Brown. Graham is the founder of Pickle & Company, award-winning podcast agency, and AI-powered, data-driven B2B podcast group in Singapore. So he's over the pond, as we would say. He is published author on the subject of the digital transformation of communication, works including the Human Communication Playbook, the Mobile Youth, Voices of the Connected Generation, and he's documenting the rise of mobile culture in the early 2000s in Japan, China, Africa, India, and brand love, how to build a brand worth talking about. I can't wait to get into this one. Welcome to the show, Graham Brown.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be here. What a welcome.
You do have podcasts. Is there any way that we can have pipe in a crowd noise, like get them all hyped up?
Oh, yeah.
Man.
I like that. Or maybe like a drum roll when you tell a joke, sort of late show style.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be too much for our editing team, but I would love it. Graham, thanks for taking the time with us, man. This is going to be awesome.
It's great to be here. I'm looking forward. We had a good chat beforehand, didn't we? And I think
we
there's
did.
a lot of ground to cover, stories to tell.
Absolutely. So let me just start out by this. So you used to have an 8 to 5, as we like to call it, like a real job. And then you were like, no, this isn't going to work for me. And then you actually had your own business. You did the deal, and then you sold your business. So give our listeners a little bit of rendition of like a synopsis of your history. And then I kind of want to dive into that a little bit, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, my first ever real job was actually selling life assurance. And I mean, Philip talked about this beforehand. I'm in dangerous territory here with the real pros. I was from the good old bad old days, when I wanted to become my own boss. And I remember one day picking up the paper, which used to get the newspaper to, find jobs in the old days. And I saw this little tiny square of a box, and it just said, be your own boss, earn like 35K or something it was, which back in the day was like, wow, I could earn that much. Yeah. So I picked up the phone and I went to this presentation and went to this office where it was in London. They had the 24th, 25th floor, all of it was occupied by this company, and everybody was wearing suits, and there was lots of young guys in there. It was all guys. And it was a lot of energy, a lot of phone calls. I was like, yeah, I like this. This is really sort of toxic masculine culture. But at the time, it kind of made sense. I think I can kind of fit in here. And they, went through the interview process. And my future boss sat down and said, yeah, it's great. You're your own boss here. You can come in anytime you like, as long as it's before 8 o'clock in the morning. So that was the deal. Yeah, that's great. And it was one of those, in the old days, the yellow pages. You'd go through yellow pages, the phone book, and you would pitch people on the phone and sell them life assurances and pensions. In the old days, when you could do that, you could pick up the phone, call somebody and say, hey, Philip, would you like to come in and talk about your investment strategy? And people would come all the way across London to meet you because you were
my goodness,
25th floor, right? That was the old days.
The wild, wild west. And
you had to make... I think it was like 120 calls a day.
Jeez. Wow.
And
no wonder why you were out. How long did you last in that gig?
Oh, yeah. I was probably one of the top survivors of the year. The drop off, the half-life was pretty steep in that game.
3 months. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of people left like day 1, 2, 3 when they realized actually this isn't the kind of world in finance that I had envisaged. This is just like hardcore sales and cold calling, quite soul destroying stuff. But I tell you, it teaches you a lot about business. the hard way as well. And, discipline as well. There would be one of the guys who joined at the same time with me. He didn't do 120 calls a day, like day in, day out. He'd always fall short. And they duct taped the phone to his head. It made him complete. That's the kind of culture it was. You could imagine it was really toxic. So that was like my baptism into the world of self-employment. It wasn't self-employment. It was really self-employment for tax reasons, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's funny. We just started a new strategy here. We're going to duct tape the phone to Brian's ear. Actually, this is great.
Can't wait.
The value that you're bringing right now. Okay, so when did you were like, all right, this is not going to work? And then how did you step into the business that you actually were your own boss?
Yeah. So you go back, this was 98.
Okay.
And
not married or married?
Sorry, at that time, I was not yet married, but I was with my future wife.
Okay.
So at the time, her family is entrepreneurial, so it's a lot easier to broach that subject of I'm going to start my own business. This is kind of an important thing, isn't it? Because if it's two of you in this business, even though she's not working in it, she's got to be on board.
Oh man, we talk about this a lot. Right? Like if your spouse is not on board, like it's not a good idea. Like just abort, change directions.
It's a good idea for the first 6 months, and then when like you still haven't got paid. Then it becomes an issue, right? And you won't get paid for the first whatever period. And it's just that belief then. She would have had to, draw on the stories of her father and, realize that they go through the struggle, right? So my first job in 98, setting up a business, the first out of the gate from the boiler room was starting a business selling websites in 98 because this was Netscape Navigator, AOL, American Online, all that stuff, CDs in the post. So people wanted websites. And it was one of those days where you could phone up a company again. So I employed that phoning strategy, which still
120
worked.
phone calls.
Yeah, 120. I'm going to phone 120 companies a day and get through to the decision maker and say, hey, have you got a website? And nobody
usually
knew.
No. Yeah. No.
Okay. So I make them. And it was one of those days where it was hit or miss. If you got lucky, you found somebody who knew what a website was and would pay you. And I remember one of our first clients, I won't name them, but they basically called me and my friend who started this business together in, and everybody was pretty clueless at the time. And they said, we pitched this idea that you could actually sell to their clients, their customers on the website, which was pretty new at the time. They said, no, we don't want that. And I remember this guy taking this brochure, this thick brochure, and slamming it down on the desk in front of me. He says, see that? I want you to scan that and put it on the website. And I said, okay. And then this whole idea of brochureware was born, right? Where you would basically go to these companies, scan their websites, charge them, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000, and just basically give them a website.
What was your history in building websites at that point? Or you had a history of calling, and then your buddy had the history of the website? Like, how did you get enough,
technical?
Yeah, ability.
Wow, you didn't really need a lot at that time. It was like if you knew a little bit of HTML, you're in the game. I mean, I graduated with a degree in AI. So I came from the world of computing.
There we go.
It doesn't teach you about websites, right?
Okay.
In those days, websites were a little bit of HTML.
Yeah.
We didn't even have JavaScript or CSS back then. Do you want a nice GIF on the front page and a form? Can I have one of those email icons that spin around?
Yes.
The good old days. But
okay, so fast forward. So that obviously took off.
Didn't last.
Okay, it did not last. All right.
No. I was clueless. I didn't really I didn't have anybody around me that knew how to run a business, or it was just a learning exercise. But I went from that into what I really cared about, because I was in Japan before in the mid 90s, and I'd seen young people using mobile phones, and like teenagers using these little tiny cell phones and using them to text people. And when I came back to the UK, I thought, I want to get into this industry somehow. But there was no opportunities because it was still, 96, 97, mobile cellular hadn't taken off yet.
Way early.
Around about 98, 99, it all started happening. And I realized that there were these companies who were making a lot of money out of cell phones, selling cell phones, marketing cell phone services, the telcos, but they didn't have a clue about their customers. So, there was an in there, and we just started writing reports on this stuff. And I had no qualifications apart from the fact that, I thought that this was what the industry was going to be and how it was going to pan out because I've seen it happen in Asia. And we started writing reports, and it became, at the time, it was a tough start, but we got some really, really good clients. We were selling to people like MTV, Disney, all the major payment companies like Visa, MasterCard, all the cell phone carriers in the world, all the handset manufacturers. We sold a report to NASA at one stage, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, I can even remember
good resume builder.
Yeah, the contact form was like, NASA, the shuttle guys. That's what they wrote on it. It was quite funny. So, yeah, but even those guys, European Commission, all the, government bought it. So it was a really, really strong product that lasted us 12 years and kind of sold itself in a way. But that was...
and you got in the front end. The front end of it, you got in. So you were really in a good place.
Yeah.
I love it.
But I learned a big lesson there about growing a business, which was, you grow this business and you create a cash base, which is cash positive asset. It keeps generating cash for you. But to get to the next stage, you've got to invest that cash flow into something else. And I didn't do that. I did it outside of the business. I invested in real estate and property because in 2000, it was a really good market to invest in. But the actual business itself didn't scale. It didn't 10x because, it was just manpower. It was just how many sales reps could you get in front of the clients, how many people could service it, et cetera, et cetera. So I learned the lesson the hard way. 12 years we had a run on that.
And it was a good job and cash flow was great. But what you're saying is to reinvest that cash flow into systems and processes that would run itself.
And new products probably too.
Yeah, new products. And take yourself out of the business. Luckily, I invested it in bricks and mortar. Which in 2000 was a good, I ended up earning more from that than I earned in the business over 15 years.
Right.
Wow.
How many people did you have working for you at that point with the telecom business?
Yeah, the research company, at the peak, we had 35 people.
Wow.
And we had about 12 in the UK, and I had about 20 odd in India who were all back office.
And 50-50 ownership between you and your buddy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Let's talk through that quick. How is that just as a 50% ownership? Brian and I are that same way, but there's a lot of people who are like, run for the hills.
Why do they say run for the hills?
It's like a marriage. There's not a lot of marriages that last. So there's just difference in opinions and different ways that you want to grow businesses and different, histories that make you think that. And so I think that's probably
in the division of labor. I think I'm doing more than you. You're doing more than me.
Right. Was there any of that between you and your partner for 12 years? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. It is a marriage. I mean, you end up spending more time with this guy than you do with your wife.
Right.
So that's something to think about. And I think
was it good for you? Did it work out? I mean, obviously it did, but
yeah, it did until the end when we just kind of, because 12 years together, we had just kind of gone our own way, and the business had reached its peak. We didn't have that sort of second growth story, and it was time now to go and do our own thing. So there was a natural fizzling out of the business at the end of it and the relationship, and I sold out my side of the business to him to take over. Okay. Because I just lost my passion for it. But the whole journey that you have to have it is a marriage. You've got to have that yin yang. You've got to have, one guy has got to be the maker and one the seller. One guy has got to be the X and the other the Y. Mm-hmm. You've got to have that. You can't have two guys that are the same.
Right.
I think that's hard.
I want to ask about your wife and what she had sacrificed up to this point. Because we all know that our wives are blocking and tackling for us, the people who are in the business, whether that is your wife or your husband. So tell us just through the 12 years that you're running this business, what kind of sacrifice did she make? Because there's all too often they're never called out and they're never honored. So in this point, that's a huge part of where our business is just my wife and Brian's wife have been sacrificing to let us do what we love to do and impact more people. So go ahead and talk through that. And then I have another question, but I'm sorry, poor Brian is like, I got questions too, but I'm just monopolizing this. Go ahead.
Let's talk about the wife question first. Number one, yeah, that's absolutely important. It's not talked about much in entrepreneurship, is it?
No.
And one of the reasons is I feel it's so important is it takes twice as long as you thought it was going to take. It always is, oh, we're going to break even in a year. Okay, actually 2 years. So it
or 6 years.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's realistic for a lot of people, right? Especially if they're starting out. You've got to have somebody on board, a partner who understands, because at some point you're going to have serious doubts about yourself. And at some point you're going to have serious doubts of whether you made the right decision. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have a wife or partner who also feels that, that's okay. But if they then start asking questions like, why did you ever leave the bank? Why did you?
Yeah. Telltale. They've tipped their hand.
Exactly. That's right. And it may somebody have tipped it for them, right? It's like, well, I was having lunch with Dana the other day.
Dang it, Dana.
Yeah.
Dana's husband's killing it at corporate America.
Yeah.
Look at what he's driving. And they're going on holiday to Barbados. Where are we going?
Right. Graham, you're speaking my love language right now. Keep going.
Exactly. So that is how it is, right? You've got to have somebody who's on board. I think, you have somebody who's on board, not just about the business, but the complete long term. Like, what are we trying to build? And I think it's similar as well, not changing the subject, but I think it's similar with people you hire. That have they worked in a startup, or do they come from entrepreneurial backgrounds? I find the best people to hire. It's a similar kind of thing in the early stages. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of flux. There's a lot of unknowns. Mm-hmm. Have they grown up around people who, for them, have had that kind of life as well and worked out? And that's a big thing. I think that's probably the biggest deciding factor of whether or not this person's going to work out long term in this situation. And so obviously that applies to our partners as well, because they don't understand it.
It probably helped that her parents were more entrepreneurial. So she's kind of like, oh yeah, par for the course.
Yeah.
Great job,
Dad,
Graham.
Interestingly, her dad, so my wife's Japanese, her dad he's passed away now, but he owned a scroll shop, so Japanese scrolls. Old, like samurai stories, and like on literal scrolls, these things you'd have to roll out, and they would be sort of about 8 feet long and about a foot high. And they'd just be like decorated. These are historical artifacts.
Like almost like art plus history plus calligraphy.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. The calligraphy is amazing. Yeah. So he owned like a shop handed down by his dad to him for like 2 or 3 generations in Tokyo. And it's still there. And it's fascinating sort of family business.
Is it still in the family?
It is. So her brother runs it now.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Awesome.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a pokey old shop, but it's got you can poke around in it and you think nothing of it, and then you'll be next to a scroll which may be like worth, I don't know, like $50,000. In this case, it's actually a what do they call it? Like a national treasure. They can't export it. You need a license to export it because it's a part of the heritage. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. But I guess, that as a kid, if you grow up around that inculcates you with this idea of work ethic and sacrifice and et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of work for maybe not a lot of return. That's the neat part. Okay. So where is the old telecom business that now that you sold it, where is it at today? Because telecom is just it's not a dying breed, but you really got to adapt and change. And so I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, it's gone. That was 10 years ago.
Wow.
So 2012, I was out. Yeah, it was probably...
So you got off of the peak.
And then...
Probably after the peak, jumped the shark a little bit. Right.
You rode the wave a little bit longer than you thought.
Yeah, let's just stay a little bit longer.
Hold on. Still hold on.
Yeah, there's a bit of ego in there.
I'm really curious here, just hearing your trajectory and just, we've done this a lot. You've done this a lot. I'm curious, after that, you kind of cash out, sell. Do you take a time off before you go into the next thing?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the big decision. I didn't need to work at the time. I didn't want to. And that was the major driver. My son was 6. Wow. So we sold all our stuff and really detoxed. It was like I really was kind of fed up with all the stuff, literally, the stuff that you accumulate through life and through business. I just wanted to detox everything. So we sold everything and got all our possessions down into 3 suitcases.
Wow.
It was like eBay for like 6 months constantly. People visiting the house, and got rid of everything. Got rid of the house, got rid of cars, everything gone. And then we traveled the world. So we bought a one-way ticket to New Zealand and just started an adventure. And it lasted us 6 years.
Wow.
And we were, just hanging out, living places, put my son into schools, local schools, like a year here, a year there. Just really wanted to go and experience. And it became a bit of a wild adventure. I mean, it's pretty extreme doing that, but I wouldn't do it differently.
Right. So let's talk through that, the selling everything. Because that sounds great. But would you have done that if you didn't have this huge influx? I don't know if huge is the right word, but an influx from the cash flow of you selling the business.
Yeah. It wasn't a huge influx. It wasn't enough to retire. It was enough to make the next few years pretty comfortable. But I'd made more from my real estate than anything else. And so that was that was probably more of the decision base. Like, okay, I have these bricks and mortar assets that if everything goes wrong, I still have that. That's my 401k, if you like.
Yeah.
And you never sold those. Those you kept.
Those everything.
I kept, yeah. Okay. All right.
And that's the importance of building, multiple assets at the same time. And I think the power that a business affords you in doing that.
Oh, yeah.
But it seems to me with a lot of the people that we've interviewed, and especially here in like the Western culture where I feel like it's like work, perform. That time off or that sabbatical or that gap, it just feels like a lot of people are scared to do it. But it seems like some of the most, I don't want to say successful because I don't like that word, but the most passionate or impactful stories are like they had that time off to like regroup, recalibrate. And I just think there's a lot of wisdom in that, it seems like. So, yeah.
I would say that the scared to do it part is really interesting. I feel that when we go into that, we think what we're scared of is, I could travel the world. God knows what would happen. Or, something might happen to me or my family, or the fear of something awful, or getting, hijacked somewhere, or like falling ill, all these kind of fears that you have, irrational fears. But actually what I discovered, the real fear is not that. The real fear is other people. The real fear is what other people will think of you.
Yeah.
And it's not like there is this, you open the door of your house and there's this baying horde out there sort of shouting at you, going, what are you doing? Yeah. Right. That's not, it would be easy if it was, but it's these subtle hints and nudges.
Yeah.
Like people may say things like, what are you going to do about your son's education?
Right.
Or, and like not do it in an approving way, or when you mention your plans to people, when you say to people, oh yeah, we're going to go and travel. And people just kind of remain quiet, like, And then they'll switch the subject, like, did you see the game the other night?
So they don't even know how to enter into it, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because I think you're right. Like there is a lot of perception of what other people are going to think of me. And like Brian and I, so we're financial advisors who really try to like bring people into their passions and like go out and do it, like start getting paid for it. And there is this cliche of like, well, don't do that, or wait till you're retired, or go get an 8 to 5 job until you have enough in your 401k, which we're not guaranteed tomorrow. So we're always trying to like impact people and empower people to go after what they're really excited about. And so, but you're right, there is something about, but what will other people think of me? And who cares what other people think of you? Because the truth is, and I love that you said this, is they're worried about something will happen to them. You know what? Something will happen to you.
Yeah.
Something will happen to you. And you know what? You're going to be better for it. Yes. And it's going to happen anyway. And like, how are you going to process this? Do you want to process it on your terms or somebody else's terms? And
You're
so
going to get old anyway.
Yes. And so even if you do this old uncommon life, as we call it, you're going to run into huge challenges. And those challenges are going to produce endurance and character and like steadfastness, all the characteristics that we all want, but we're not going to really sign up for that usually. But what you find is like when you do take the plunge, like you do start seeing like things do happen and you know how to adapt and overcome and you're way better for it. And so we love helping people step off the proverbial bridge and let their parachute open up, because in that drop is where life happens. And when that parachute happens, you get to look up and see and look around and see all the beautiful scenery and see what you've just come from. And there's a lot of people who are just like, I'm not getting up on that bridge, and will try to like dissuade you from doing it. But you're right. It is the perception of other people that people are like, oh, I'm getting off the bridge. I can't do it. There's no way, you know. but yeah, this like condescending, like, well, and we always say, well, they can't do it, but it doesn't mean it's not for you. And watching
they don't
people
want
get
you to do it
encouraged-
either. I think that's
Right.
the key, isn't it? Because if you do it, then they say, why didn't I get up on that bridge?
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
I love it.
That's a painful
Okay, so you're
question.
traveling the world with
Yeah.
your wife and what,
Son.
6-year-old at this point?
Yeah.
Son? Yeah. So the first you get all your luggage ready and you look at each other, you and your wife is all on board of this way? Or
Oh,
is she
yeah.
like, I don't know, I don't know.
She's
Graham.
all on board, yeah.
Okay. And you go to New Zealand.
We fly to New Zealand, yeah.
Okay. And then you get off the plane and you're like, the Browns are here.
Yeah. Now
We've
what?
arrived.
What are we doing next? So you got to find a place to stay, right?
Find a place to stay. Yep.
Get your son in some kind of education.
Not yet. Not in New Zealand.
Okay. No. Okay.
Well,
you
we only
just-
spent a few months in New Zealand, and then we had the choice, you see. We could go to the South Island of New Zealand, or we could fly to Fiji. So we thought
Yeah,
it's
you're
the
flying
same
to
price.
Fiji.
We're going to Fiji.
yeah, you are. I knew that
offense.
answer before you told me. Like, you're
Yeah,
going
I
to
mean,
Fiji. Love you guys.
ALB. Yeah, and that
Okay.
test, B wins every time. So, yeah, we went out to Fiji. Then we just kind of hopped around, ended up in Hawaii, then ended up in California, then across to Florida. We just went all the way around, and then we settled all the way out into the Mediterranean. We went to Cyprus and then down to... We actually settled... At this point, we were kind of traveling nomadically. And then we settled... There's a group of islands off the west coast of Africa called the Canary Islands. And they're
Yeah.
technically part of Spain, but they're geographically part of Africa. So we landed there and landed on one of the islands called Lanzarote. It's like a mini Hawaii. It's a volcano. And we settled there that was the first settling down for a year and a half. Yeah, so that was kind of like, I got my son into school, got him into this like really sort of chilled village school where nobody spoke English.
Wow.
And he was 6 years old. It was beautiful. It was like, he doesn't have any brothers or sisters, but, that he joined, and day one, they're like singing, playing soccer,
Oh, it's
Spanish
so cool.
kids, right? And it was just like, we're just going to play all day.
It's crazy. Let's talk through this, because everybody thinks that they want to travel a lot, but traveling is hard work.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
I mean, it sounds great, and at least you had your family with you. But at some point, it just feels good to just kind of hunker down. So, talk about this, just traveling and how I'd say exhausting.
Oh man, this is. I'm so glad you brought this up, because you look at the Instagram feed. Now you look at my Instagram feed and okay, there's a Fiji sunset, and then I'm in Samoa, and it's Hawaii. But let me tell you about the reality behind that, guys. Is that, it's the thing is, if you take away a lot of your comfort support, so that's not just your house and your 8 to 5 job and your commute and your routines, but it's the people and the communities you belong to, right? You strip all of that away and you're very vulnerable.
Oh.
And add to that, you're tired and you're hungry. You know what it's like when you fly to a new country and it's just hard just to find something to eat. And like the supermarket doesn't open at the hour that you want it to do, like they do back home, and they don't sell the food that you or use your card.
Yeah.
All those kind of stupid things.
No, yeah. It's like Amazing Race all the time.
It's right. And that is it. And you with that, and you're dragging a family behind you who are hungry.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that's a reality that is not talked about on those Instagram feeds, right? You're often hungry and vulnerable and sometimes scared.
Right. I love analogies, Graham, and definitely Brian. It's almost like you see a new mother with a beautifully sleeping baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a beautifully like white, pristine dress. But what you don't see is all the other stuff.
Right?
Yeah. Wow.
That's the
amazing.
survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like, bringing up a baby in the first few months. You're just keeping this thing alive, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes in traveling, you're just staying alive. I know it's not dangerous, but you're hungry and you're looking for shelter. It's hard. And that can, cause fractures in the relationships in between the families when you're hungry and you're sort of fed up. So it's a real stress test. Yeah, hangry. I'm a hangry person. Not a good person to be around when I'm at the airport and they've shut down all the cafes. And the ATM doesn't work because my card doesn't work in that network, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you get hunkered down in this amazing island. Your son seems to be thriving, playing soccer and singing.
Yeah.
And you and your wife are like, now she feels happy. You guys are here for a while. And then when do you start thinking like, you know what? I want to go do something again. I want to create something.
Probably after about a week. That's just an entrepreneurial thing. And I just have to learn to shut that thing up for my family's sake, because you know what it's like when you're an entrepreneur. That is always on. There's no volume switch on that voice in your head, right? It's always there. So you just manage to go with it and live with it. Whilst I was in Lanzarote, one of the reasons why it was a great place to live, it's year-round sunshine, amazing lifestyle, and culture is so chilled, so relaxed. The Spanish just like sitting out, drinking a coffee, chill. They like to take 3 hours for lunch. It's very different from the world that we're all used to, isn't it? Everybody's on the go all the time. Hey, one thing I never ever saw, those of you in the US, same in Europe, I never ever saw in Spain somebody walking with a coffee. It's like I see that all the time in the US or in London. People walking, holding a Starbucks. I noticed that in Spain.
What do you think that is? Tell me that. Yeah, this is weird.
It's illegal. I don't know. It's just culturally unacceptable. Like when you have a coffee,
you're sitting it down.
Yeah, Brian, Philip, Graham, sit down. It's like we're going to have a coffee and chat, and that's it.
And they don't do that over in Europe? I thought that's what they do. I thought this is my perception is like you just sit down and have 14-hour dinners or 7-hour dinners.
I don't think that happens a lot anymore. I think that's probably how it used to be, right? But not anymore. But you've got to go to these islands for that, right? In the Spanish are a bit like that. The Spanish mañana. But like even the Spanish think that the islanders are lazy. So it kind of gives you an idea. But it's a beautiful place. But after a while, you start to kind of, there's something missing here. I did there's an Ironman triathlon there.
Oh.
It takes place every year. I did that.
I love it.
Completed that. It's like
that's a big deal, Graham. Like you're just kind of bypassing it, but that's kind of a big deal.
It is a big deal, yeah. Man. All right. Yeah. All the pros train there because it's like, year-round sunshine. A lot of the European pros go and train there. So there's a big training camp out in Lanzarote. So it's good.
Which honestly, this really does say something about your wife, because to train for an Ironman, like it's kind of like there's sacrifices that are made by your wife, because it's kind of a lonely deal and kind of.
She's not training with me for sure.
Yeah, right.
It's not her gig.
But it probably scratched that itch for you of like, I got to keep my mind doing something. And there's a goal in mind, right? It is a challenge. So that probably scratched the itch for a while, and you did it. Were you happy with your results?
Yeah, really happy. I did. It was a full. It was the first full I ever did.
Yeah. And so just for our listeners who don't know, it's 2.4 miles swimming, 112 miles biking, 26.2 miles running.
Marathon, yeah. I'd never run a marathon before. So when I came off the bike, sort of 8 hours in, I had a marathon to finish. That was pretty
literally
hardcore. But I did really, I think it's just an amazing experience. They can't take it away from you. You do it, and that's it for life, right? You've done it now.
I had a friend who did one in Wisconsin, which is a state closer to here, but he did it and he was driving back and, like your body's like, what the hell just happened to me? And what did you make me go through? And so they were walking into probably 2 hours away from the Ironman spot. They're walking into a gas station and it was a rough road for him. Like he just was in the car cooped up for 2 hours after running and biking and swimming and like just a slow walk. And he looks across the parking lot and another guy was same walk. And they looked at each other and it was just like this instant like credibility, like you're awesome.
You feel my
and
pain.
I was like, I kind of want that actually.
You want that. You do. Yeah. It's the suffering. There's something about it.
Yeah. I know.
What is it? I think I don't know. Somebody once said that suffering's the closest thing to heaven. And I thought about it, that it really made me think is that there's something otherworldly in suffering. And putting yourself deliberately in these situations where you experience that, A, to feel alive, but also B, to feel really raw, the rawness of the experience. That you
getting
feel
through it.
You actually feel the pain. That just reminds you what it's like to be alive. And there's something in that. I haven't really explored it enough or articulated it enough.
Yeah.
But
I'm glad we talked through it. So are you going to do another Ironman or it's like one and done?
I don't know. It's never one and done. There's always unfinished business. There's always like, I could have done 5 minutes better on my bike time there. So that will always bug me.
Right.
It's a lot of time though. It's a full-time job like training. You're doing 20 hours a week training. So you're doing 20 hours a week training, 20 hours a week eating, and then like 20 hours a week extra sleeping. That's full-time.
And still trying to balance a family.
Oh yeah, on top of that. Well, you can talk about your training plans, but
welcome to entrepreneurship. Okay, so keep going. So you're there. You got done with the Ironman, and then when do you start pouring yourself into? Because your new gig, or I shouldn't say new, but the gig that you're doing now is podcasting, right? And telling stories and things like that. Which obviously, I don't know if you know this, but like you could probably be successcul at anything with your accent. I always am like totally like jealous.
Apart from being a dentist, maybe.
That's even
exactly
that,
true.
Even that. But love your accent, by the way.
Thank you.
So podcasting. Tell us your journey on that.
Yeah, so I've always been a storyteller and always found that it was not an easy gig to make money out of. And it was always something that you were told off for when you scolded as a kid for being a storyteller. But what happened was around, like after the time when we left Lanzarote, we ended up moving around a bit more, ended up on Okinawa, which is an island, part of Japan, right out towards Taiwan, the subtropical island, beautiful. And we lived there for a bit. And so we're in Asia now. I wanted to get back into Asia because, I'd been there since the 90s. I love the culture, obviously, because of the family as well.
Right.
And wanted to get back to it. And I also wanted to be part of the growing Asian tech scene because 2017, it was really picking up. Everything was sort of tracking what was happening West Coast by about 3 or 4 years. So they hadn't really had the unicorns yet. But everything was really picking up. China was obviously growing fast. And so I wanted to be part of that. And so we moved back to Okinawa. And really, I felt that I didn't have a way to connect with people. So really by chance, and it had started before we got to Okinawa, but really I picked it up, is I started a podcast purely because I wanted to reach out to people. I was on this tiny tropical island and I wanted to reach out to people all over the world and hear their stories about tech. And I kept it focused on Asia at the time. And that, when I say all over the world, that's 4 billion people. So I started a podcast called Asia Tech Podcast. And the goal of it was just to get founders and entrepreneurs from around Asia to tell their stories. And there'll be people like me, people just starting out, a lot of early stage startups. And I started that purely to connect with people. Not as a business, but because I was kind of missing all of that. And I'd done the Ironman, so I wanted another challenge and wanted to connect with another community, another tribe, and that was a great way to get back into it. So I started it as a hobby, and it grew. And then, let's say about 30 or 40 episodes in, when I really started building an audience. Now I was getting thousands rather than, tens.
Hundreds.
Tens at the beginning. And there were people that did listen to because they were doing me favors, right? They were friends. But now it sort of get to thousands. And then people started asking me saying, oh, how do I do this? And people started reaching out to me. And, people started asking me questions like, how can I start a podcast? Because it was 2017, 2018, still very, very early in the day. And I continued that podcast. I did 503 episodes of that one.
In what time frame? Because that's real. Well, you got to keep feeding that beast.
Oh, yeah. Time frame 2.5 years, I think.
Okay.
So 2019. Yeah. I mean, at some point we were doing like 3 or 4 or 5 a week, like daily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Rocking.
So we did
and then you would just automatically post them, or would you like do it in a cadence?
There wasn't really a consistency of the cadence. Like now absolutely you have to have consistency in your cadence to really rank on the podcast platforms. But back then it didn't matter. Back then to grow an audience of a podcast in 2017, 2018, you just needed a podcast. That was it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And obviously the rules have changed a lot now because of competition. But that was just about how do I build a podcast, how do I build an audience, and it all came together. So I did 503 episodes, and that really became an onboard into a business because 2018, 19, we moved to Singapore to start the podcast studio. I was still doing the podcast, set up a podcast studio, raise a little bit of capital for the startup, and then set up a podcast agency. And really, it kind of pulled me. It wasn't sort of a part of a master plan. It was almost like, people kept asking me and bugging me about this. And I thought, this would be really a lot of fun. Helping people start podcasts and working with some great people. And so it really was, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to systemize this thing. Mm-hmm. And that became an agency. And nobody had really, that was the first podcast agency in Asia. You're talking 4 billion people. So there wasn't a playbook.
Right. 4 billion people that all have stories to say. Like all of them are uncommon in their own way. Absolutely. None of them know how to start a podcast or a successful podcast at that. So what a perfect industry to jump into.
Well, it was kind of reminding me a bit like telecoms 20 years before, right? It was always, when I went into telecoms in 98, 99, people were saying, no, I was saying, because my gig in telecoms in 98, 99 was a company called Mobile Youth, which was about how young people use mobile phones. That's why MTV bought it and Disney bought it, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody said to me in 98, 99 that we don't do kids. We're not interested. Kids aren't the future of mobile. And I was like, no. I've seen
they
young people
are. Yeah.
Texting, sharing content. They were like, no. I said, that's what I've seen and that's what I believe. And I think that there's something maybe attractive about being, an outlier, having to prove people wrong in the first 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. Early adopter and diffusion of innovation.
Yeah. Right. Trying to see the distant signals, if you will, that others don't see. That's where I think there are opportunities.
Well, I was looking at, on the way in, I looked in, it looks like, I don't know, I haven't fact checked this, but it looks like Singapore is going to make Bitcoin legal tender.
Yeah.
It was Singapore or Malaysia, but
it's quite advanced in terms of crypto here.
That's what I wanted to ask. I mean, you've obviously had a history of being on the forefront of what's breaking and business to business, how to leverage this across multiple platforms, multiple countries, continents. What do you see? I think podcasting is obviously, I don't want to say maturing. I still think it's early, kind of like Airbnb, but what do you see kind of as that next forefront?
Yeah, we're in a really interesting time with podcasting. It's definitely maturing. It's professionalizing. I would say what I've really focused on and what our team is focused on is corporate podcasts. And there aren't a lot of people that do this. A lot of people do the exciting stuff, like true crime or the hardcore history type podcasts, which are great. Right. I love all that. And Joe Rogan. But a few people want to do the corporate stuff because it's hard and it requires a different mindset and a different set of relationships. But I always feel like, you really make money when you find a category of one that nobody else wants to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you are able to identify that, you can double down everything, messaging, the biz dev process, the funnel, pricing, all of it to match that category of one. Because people don't want to serve corporate podcasts, but I feel that corporate podcasts are 10, maybe 100 times bigger than consumer podcasts, because think of all the money spent on public relations, all the money spent on events, on press releases, on white papers, on analyst events that really go nowhere.
Right.
And I feel that that's such a huge opportunity. And I see that in the same way that I look at those other opportunities that people just kind of rejected because they didn't see what was right in front of them.
Yeah.
Or they don't have the discipline to make it happen.
I've even noticed that, some of the crypto projects that I follow, they've kind of launched a corporate podcast, to kind of, so I see what you're getting at there playing out right now.
Yeah. It's more of a long game. It's an investment in an asset, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you think about it, it's like building your brand, your personal brand, and it's top of funnel stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about a brand like Nike just came to my mind when you said that, of like all the athletes, all the creators in that business, all that goes into doing Nike on a global scale, like how many stories and lessons and wisdom are packed in there, and how many consumers would want to, just plug into that.
Right.
Yeah. And you got to think about, even in their story, the way they went into it was really about building the community and the athletes, wasn't it? That was all about their play, the love for running, the love for the sport, rather than, we want to make really, really good shoes, which is really sort of the byproduct of that.
Graham, this is a fun question. If your life was a movie, what would the title of your movie be?
What would the title of my movie be? I don't know if I can think of a witty one-liner. It would have to be, I don't know, what would it be? I'd have to look at some of the other movies. I think that probably I would borrow from something like that. What else? The Joker.
The Joker. Yes. So good.
There you go.
Wow.
I don't think that would go down well, but it'd have to be something like that.
Well, I mean, I'm super grateful we got you on the show. Thanks for taking the time. I mean, your uncommon life is real. And I love how you just constantly are adapting and changing, and also appreciating, your spouse along the way. And then also kind of pulling back to the Asian roots. It's just really neat. And so I'm grateful that you took the time with us. Any closing thoughts that you have for our listeners that are like just maybe too scared or too worried about somebody else and what they think, to start their own uncommon life?
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there, isn't there, who are probably staring out the window. I would say to people that, I'm going to steer away from the obvious trite statements that I can give about, life is an adventure, these kind of things. I would say that, the key to really living life on your own terms and living an uncommon life is to be aware that in our lives that we build up a lot of clutter that prevents us from doing this. I think that the nearest analogy, I know this is the analogy show, is like, it's like flying a hot air balloon. Is that, to fly a hot air balloon, you don't try and fly harder. You don't sort of, force it up into the air harder or, like with more power. But what you do is you just take those sandbags out of the basket and you throw them off, right? And the balloon rises naturally. And I feel that that's kind of within all of us, is that what we're trying to do is like we're stuck on the ground, weighed down by these huge sandbags, like blasting on that burner, but it doesn't move. And what is holding us back is the expectations of other people and the stories that we tell about ourselves, which imprison us. And once we take those, and they could be objects or things, or the sort of totemic items in our lives, like my job title or my car, once we declutter that, then we're able to rise naturally. We're able to make decisions based on our own terms as opposed to meeting the expectations of other people. That's a tough process, but it's a gradual process that we can all take. It starts with working from home, perhaps. It starts from not adopting or a job title which it puts you in this hierarchical position within an organization. Or it starts with like making small changes and nudges to your life, which help you make better decisions because you see more clearly. That's a long-term process. And that's the constant adaptation, constant tweaking, and living an examined life, which I think is all part of the journey.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's great. It's a way to close it out, Graham. Well, hey, we really appreciate your time, and we just we hope that you have huge success in the future. I love what you're doing, and I'd love to maybe catch up some more later.
Absolutely.
But up to this point, you've been listening to the Uncommon Life Project. I've been your host, Philip Ramsey.
And I'm Brian Dewhurst.
Thanks for tuning in. Thanks again, Graham. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Go be uncommon.
Bye-bye.
That's all for this episode of the Uncommon Life Project, brought to you by Uncommon Wealth Partners. Be sure to visit uncommonwealth.com to learn more about our services. Don't miss an episode as we introduce you to inspiring people who are actively pursuing an uncommon life.